Soft wool caught at the sword calluses on his palms, and Wulf jerked, kicking away heavy coils that draped over his legs. He sat upright, cried out in pain, and doubled over on his side, curling his arms and legs inward to protect his soft middle. "Wulf!" It was a voice that crackled with age, a voice that he recognized. Wulf looked up through tangled snarls of hair and saw Aerie's concerned face bent over him, patting his back and brushing the hair out of his face, her expression soothing. "It's all right, Wulf," she said gently. "You're safe here. You're safe." He was lying on the cot in the back room of Aerie's shop, the one she reserved for cases she needed to observe overnight when she dosed them with her potions and remedies. A small fire snapped and popped in the hearth that shared a wall with the kitchen, providing a soft light in the room's darkness. Strings of drying herbs hung in the corners. "What happened?" His words came out in a croak. Aerie stood, helping him ease back down into the bed, settling a pillow behind his head, and drawing the quilt up to his chest. Even the slow motion made sharp lances of pain burst through his neck and shoulder. Once he was settled, Wulf put his hand to his neck and felt the soft give of bandages covering a poultice. The bandages spread along his left collarbone and shoulder, down his arm nearly to his elbow. He gave Aerie a confused look. "You were bitten," she said gently. "I remember." Wulf shivered. "But how?" Aerie spread her hands in confusion. "I don't know. All I know is that Captain Royce nearly broke down my door last night. When I answered, he came stumbling in with you slung over his shoulders. He said you'd been bitten by a serpent and needed care." Royce. Wulf's mind raced. Why had the captain been the one to find him? And how did Royce know? He knows. He knows about the king. The door creaked open, and for one heart-stopping moment, Wulf thought it would be Captain Royce. Diane poked her head around the door instead. "Do you?" She stopped, a broad grin breaking over her face. "Wulf, you're awake!" She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, drawing him into a gentle hug. Wulf hugged her back, feeling the tension in his body melting. It was surprising to realize he felt so much more grounded and steady with her arms around him. He buried his face in Diane's hair, smelling the calming scent of herbs and lavender from Aerie's shop. "How are you feeling?" Diane asked, pulling away so she could see his face. She brushed tangles of hair out of his eyes. "We'll have to do something about this now that you're awake. We may have bigger things to worry over than tangled hair," Aerie said softly, laying a hand on her granddaughter's shoulder. Diane nodded, not taking her gaze off of Wulf. "What happened?" she demanded. I don't know if I should tell you," Wulf said quietly. Diane jerked back, chin going up in defiant surprise. He reached for her, gripping her hands in both his and squeezing gently. "I want to, but I'm not sure I even fully remember what happened." That was a lie. Even as he said it, he felt a sharp bolt of pain run down his neck and arm, as if the memory of being bitten was enough for his body to react. He flinched, putting a hand to his shoulder. "I don't want to get you two in trouble," he whispered. The anger in Diane's eyes faded as quickly as it had appeared. "I'm sorry, Wulf." He squeezed her hands again, wordlessly letting her know it was all right. Aerie reached for her cane, rising from her chair. "I suppose now that you're awake, I should go speak to Captain Royce. He requested that I tell him the instant you were able to speak." Wulf stiffened, glancing over at her. By the grim look on her face, he knew immediately that she both didn't want to obey the captain's orders, yet feared what he would do if she did not. How much did Ari know, or had she guessed? "Wulf?" Diane said softly. So Ari hadn't told Diane who had brought him here. Wulf forced himself to relax. Whatever strange game the captain was playing, he had no desire to see Diane and Ari caught up in it, more than they already were. They would only try to protect him. "You can tell the captain I'm well enough to see him, Ari," he said. The frown lines around her mouth deepened, but she nodded. "Diane, while I'm gone, put the kettle on. We'll need to steep herbs for a new poultice before too long." She left the room, and they heard her muffled footsteps fade out of the shop and heard the gentle clunk of the shop door falling closed after her. Diane placed her hand over Wulf's, where it lay slack on the quilt. "I'm glad you're alive," she said softly. When the captain dragged you in here last night, soaked to the bone and gray, I thought—" Her mouth pinched. Wulf twined his fingers into hers and squeezed gently. "But I'm alive," he said. Diane suddenly leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Wulf made a startled noise, and she jolted back like she'd singed herself. I'm sorry, I should go do what Gran said." Wulf tightened his grip around her fingers as she tried to rise. "Stay here." She glanced back down at him, her eyes dark with surprise. Wulf let out a gentle breath as he raised his good hand, traced his fingers along the curve of her jaw. The kiss had startled him, yes, but their hands clasped together naturally, and he felt suddenly that if she left him, she would be leaving a hole in his chest. "If I could get up, I'd be kissing you," he said, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear. "But the only thing keeping me upright at the moment are these pillows, so I'm afraid you're going to have to finish what you started." Diane gave a nervous chuckle and leaned forward, her velvet soft lips just barely brushing his. Wulf slid his arm down, pressing his arm against the small of her back, pulling her closer. He should have done this a long time ago. Someone coughed. Diane straightened, and Wulf looked up to see Captain Royce standing in the doorway, a sardonic smirk on his lips. Wulf pushed himself back so hard he felt a tearing pain along his collarbone. He hissed out and doubled, pressing his hand against the poultice as hot blood began to thread between his fingers. Diane swore. "You've ripped stitches, Wulf. Stay still." She shoved past the captain, giving him an angry glare, and flounced out into the shop. Royce raised an eyebrow. "Enjoying your convalescence?" "What do you want?" Wulf growled. "That's a piss-poor way to greet your captain." Wulf felt a hot flush wash along his face and neck. He wrapped the quilt tight around his fists, hoping to hide his clenched fingers from the captain. Diane came back into the room, pulling up a chair alongside the bed and settling a bowl of medical supplies on her lap. Royce leaned against the doorframe, silently watching as Diane unwrapped the bandages and poultice from Wulf's neck and shoulder. Wulf caught a glimpse of blood and a yellow-green ooze that he fiercely hoped was the poultice before Diane threw the soiled bandages into the fire. Her touch was gentle, but Wulf still sucked in a sharp breath as she began to clean out the wounds and redo stitches. "How is he?" Royce asked. Wulf felt Diane's hands tremble at the sudden question, but she answered coolly. "It will take some time for him to be active. We had to cut out poison-deadened flesh on his shoulder, and until that mends, Wulf will need to keep his arm still." She looked up, making eye contact with him, and Wulf knew that the comment was as much for him as it was for the captain. "It's going to be some time before he'll be able to swing a sword." Abruptly, she turned to face the captain. "What happened to him?" Royce raised an eyebrow. "You haven't told her?" "I've been awake less than an hour," Wulf said. "Ah, well then. Suffice it to say that Wulf was bitten by a venomous serpent," Royce said. "I'm sure he can fill you in on the details later." Wulf winced as Diane packed more of the herbal poultice against the wound and began winding bandages around it. The poultice stung ever so slightly against the edges of the stitches. He hadn't realized the extent of his injuries. If Ari had to cut out dead flesh, it was no wonder the wound ached so badly. "When you say a long time, how long exactly do you think?" Royce asked. Diane glanced over her shoulder at him, her eyes flashing with frustration. "Maybe as long as a month? It will all depend on how quickly he can heal." "A month is a long time. I need him sooner." "An injured swordsman will do you no good, Captain." Wulf reached for Diane's hand, squeezing her fingers. Royce shifted on his feet, shoulders going back and somehow seeming to fill the doorway as he straightened. "Don't forget it was I who dragged him from the moat and brought him here, Diane. I could have let the poison and foul water do its work." He made eye contact with Wulf. "You may no longer belong to the guardsman, Wulf, but you do belong to me. Unless you wish to abandon everyone you claim to care about." With that final veiled threat, Royce left, brushing past Ari. Wulf waited until he heard the shop door close before he grabbed Diane's hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "You and Ari shouldn't have." Despite her grandmother watching from the doorway, Diane leaned forward and kissed him again. "Stop talking nonsense," she murmured. "Gran and I aren't stupid. We knew there had to be some scheme going when the captain brought you to us, and we knew full well the risks we were taking. You shouldn't have taken me in." "I thought I told you to stop talking nonsense." "We couldn't have refused to take you in. Ari said, hobbling forward and inspecting the bandages Diane had wrapped. Well done. We'd better leave him to rest, Diane. She gently nudged against his shoulder, urging him to lie back down. We'll discuss everything later. Wulf wanted to protest, but he could tell he'd been awake and active for too long with his injuries. His back and shoulders ached, and sharp pains were shooting down his entire right side. He felt bone-weary, far beyond even what he'd felt after night guard duty for weeks on end. Ari was correct. The best thing he could do now was rest. Reluctantly, Wulf lowered himself to the bed and let Diane pull the blanket into place over his chest. He blinked heavily, letting himself drift off as her lips brushed against his hair. Then the two women crept from the room.